Yeah, well, Apple computers always made the consumer the principal focus of its marketing power, but lately the company has turned to corporate and government customers, yielding some surprising contract wins. This week, Halliburton switched to the iPhone, dumping 4,500 BlackBerries in the process. And the Department of Veteran Affairs is allowing iPhones and iPads. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration is dropping BlackBerries for iPhones. And now the Air Force is in the market for up to 18,000 iPads. The Air Force, it's another sign that this isn't the old whimsical Apple of 2005. The new Apple means business.
We estimate today maybe 15% of all of Apple's business is actually corporate, and I think having a more security function has been a big part of that expansion.
ISI analyst Brian Marshall says business accounts, once foreign to Apple, are now a big focus.
5 years ago, they only had a couple people dedicated towards the corporate channel as well as the public channel. Now they have hundreds of dedicated salespeople actively going out and building up business.
It's hurting Research in Motion in particular. RIM's market share slid from 14% to 8% in the last year, while Apple's gone from 16% to 24%.
Anybody that competes against them from a RIM, from a Samsung, from a Nokia, from a Motorola standpoint, as well as the other tablet manufacturers, I think are going to be challenged when they stand up and they compete against Apple.
Cory, why didn't Apple have a corporate sales team before 5 years ago? Why wasn't this market important to them back then?
I think any market 5 years ago Apple would have been happy to have. But, for a company that's sole focus is the product and sort of says, here's the product, buy it if you want it, it's a very different approach. And I think when Steve Jobs came back to the company, really paring down what they were going after, including the beloved education market, corporate sales was just not a low-hanging fruit for them. But now with the change in enterprise software, the security provided by the iPhone and iPad devices, and the success of the devices themselves in the consumer market, people are bringing these into the enterprise, whether the enterprise likes it or not. Enterprises and government customers and the likes of Halliburton are responding.
All right, thanks for that, Cory Johnson, our editor-at-large. For more on Apple's crusade into the enterprise, let's go down to San Diego and our Paul Kedrosky, a longtime tech investor and entrepreneur. He's also a Bloomberg contributing editor and author of the blog Infectious Greed. Paul, you coined it, the Apple Death Star. Is this the Apple Death Star at work?
Yeah, it's more of the same. I mean, it's this remarkable ability of Apple to sort of, as it moves into these new markets, to sort of absorb all the revenue and profits in those markets in a way that's unprecedented, both in terms of, the percentage of revenue and profits that accrue to Apple, as well as the pace at which, others decline. Everyone's been talking all week about how, Apple's now roughly, and you mentioned this in the lead, the market cap of Google and Microsoft combined. The more interesting stat for me is that every day this week for the last 3 days, Apple has added to its own market cap roughly the market cap of RIM, and therein lies your problem.
It is pretty incredible watching Apple march on. Why do you think Apple is seeing such success in the enterprise now? Is it purely because of the products?
Yeah, I mean, this is really, if you want to sort of take it up a level, it's really about the nature of how technology has changed. If you think back 20 years in the evolution of technology, the way that technology entered the marketplace was it started off at work. People bought personal computers for employees and others because these were such expensive big boxes, and eventually they came home because people said these PC things are kind of interesting, maybe I should buy one for home. This generation of technology has been the exact opposite. People adopted the latest cellular technology like RIM and like touchscreen phones in general in their homes first, and then when they went to the workplace, they felt like they were operating in some kind of disadvantaged, underprivileged marketplace. It was like, oh my goodness, I have to use these crazy other devices, these flip phones and keyboard-based products and so on. So they began smuggling them into the workplace. And so what you're seeing right now is in many ways a response to sort of a de facto situation where Apple iPhone had become a corporate standard. It was just happening by people smuggling them into the workplace.
So what do you see as Apple's future in the enterprise? Do you see Apple one day becoming as big as BlackBerry once was? Where does Android fit into the equation?
Oh, I think Apple's run in the workplace is just beginning. We're looking at, I think the stat, you had the stat earlier, but something like 15–16% of sales coming from the corporate marketplace. I'm guessing that over the next 2–3 years that will pretty close to double, so that you'll be looking at RIM-like numbers in terms of both percentage of market share as well as contribution to Apple's own business. And so it's going to become a very, very big piece of their business, in large part because they've saturated the consumer marketplace, and the rapid adoption right now is happening within the enterprise as they go through this great replacement cycle that absolutely favors Apple, given where they are in the product cycle. iPhone 5 this summer, iPad 3 in March. I mean, it's really a pretty timely situation for them to be in.
Apple stock barely blinked when Steve Jobs died. How long do you think the shares can keep this up?
Well, the market thrives on these kinds of upside surprises. There's incredible and remarkable skepticism about the stock. So, right now, over the next, say, 18 months, the momentum looks 100% in Apple's favor with the product cycle that I just described. iPad 3, iPhone 5, I say Apple TV later this year. So, it looks like an 18-month run ahead for the company as long as people remain as skeptical as they are, as evidenced by the valuation of the stock. So my guess is we could see, a solid 12 months of stock advance if it continues along like this. Now, if it's like this last week, well, we could see all the run in the next 2 weeks, in which case all bets are off. But otherwise, the momentum looks good for 12 to 18 months out.
Right. We always say, though, nothing lasts forever, and Apple keeps surprising us. What would it take for Apple's, stock increases to slow down or reverse? When is this trend going to stop?
Well, Right. The history of consumer electronics is really dreadful, obviously. And so, all you have to do is go back and look over the history of consumer electronics and see that the hot box companies from Creative Labs and many, many others down through history do fantastically well right up until the moment they don't. These things don't tend to break slowly. They tend to crack. Then they crack very, very quickly, surprise investors a couple of times, and the stock rapidly halves. And, unfortunately for Apple, likely that is in their future. And when it comes is obviously an open question. I don't see it in the next 12 to 18 months, given the current product cycle, but it will happen, and it will happen with a very loud and very disastrous crack for many people, and that is the history of consumer electronics. Someone will come along, do the same things, cheaper, faster, something else, and Apple won't have had the vision to have been in that place, perhaps because of the absence of Steve Jobs, but it will happen, and it'll be catastrophic when it does.
So you don't think until the middle of 2013 Apple is going to keep going up and up and up?
Yeah, I mean, unless everybody says, oh, it's going up and up and up, and they bid it to 2,000 in the next 6 weeks, well, then I'd say, this is probably one of the best shorts in the Nasdaq. But as long as it doesn't go completely hairy in the interim, yeah, I mean, everything works in its favor, given where it is in the product cycle, and given that it's not expensive and is sitting there with, a full Facebook of cash on the balance sheet. There's lots of ways it could surprise people, including potentially a very low dividend would represent another surprise that's entirely in Apple's hands at this point, given its balance sheet and given its income.
Exactly. Everybody wondering what Apple's going to do with all that cash. Paul Kedrosky, Bloomberg contributing editor. Stick around. We're going to be talking with you a bit later in the program.